Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for Promethean Action's live question and answer show. We do this show every Thursday. Thank you for tuning in. Joined today by the lovely Barbara Boyd and Susan Kokinda, and of course, you, the audience. As you come into the show this morning, please let us know where you're watching from. Drop us a quick like. So to set the stage for today's show, I'm going to start off here just with some truths from Donald Trump. And today's show is titled Why the Middle East Was Actually Part of the Plan. We're going to be talking more about Donald Trump's plan today, but let's begin with this discussion that was circulating on the internet yesterday. A close friend of mine messaged me yesterday morning and was like, Adam, multiple sources are saying that the reason why Donald Trump hasn't continued bombing Iran is because the country simply doesn't have the weapons that he says. So yesterday, 10 hours ago, Donald Trump addressed that and said, the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, especially of certain types. Additionally, large amounts are being manufactured and shipped to the U.S. as needed. Defense companies are building the largest numbers of plants and factories in our country's history. The leakers of these treasonous statements are being hunted down. Long jail term sentences will be sought. President Donald J. Trump. But I also want to go to the elections, specifically surrounding Michigan. And Susan's going to have plenty to say about that in just a little bit. I was 20-1 last night on endorsements, and numerous of them were outliers. But if you studied the fake news, you would think it was just the opposite, 1-28. All they talked about was the one, and that's why they call it the fake news, President Donald Trump. Great news for the Republican Party. El Sayed, a communist loser who hates Jews and Israel, is the projected winner in his race with the Socialist Party, I assume. As usual, the polls were way off on this one. She was not expected to do nearly as well as she did. Now the Democrats' crazy policies will only get worse. And finally, Wayne County, Detroit in Michigan, is one of the most corrupt voting areas in the United States, if not the world. It is strictly third world. Miracles happen in Wayne County, including more votes being cast than are voters by a lot. Therefore, the communist, who is not liked in Detroit, is potentially in vote counter trouble. The radical left socialist has a real shot. And don't discount all those fake mail-in ballots that will surprisingly show up at the last moment. Get ready for another rigged election. In November, we must vote for Mike Rogers and make Michigan too big to rig. Barbara, why don't you take it from here?
Well, I think, a couple of things as we look at this. We're inching towards a settlement in the Middle East. And, basically, if you look on the internet, there's kind of two ideas which are prevalent. One is bomb them into hell without actually thinking about the consequences of that in terms of a nation of 91 million people. And the second is, it was wrong and this was all basically being done for Israel. And that lie is being dissembled every single day by the types of frictions you see with Israel and what Trump is actually doing here, which is what we've been stressing at Promethean Action all along. It has nothing to do with anything that the internet is speculating about as to motives, purposes, or what have you. The idea here, pure and simple, is let's get rid of the Middle East conflict once and for all, and at the same time inflict maximum damage to the dark economy, which is at the center of what the IRGC, Iran, Lebanon in its horrible state based on all these the century full of war has been, all right, which is a big racket in terms of pricing oil, which is at the center of much of the world's economy. That's where the City of London has actually survived. Its most recent iteration is that it's taken all this money from the Gulf oil companies as the basis of its survival. My piece yesterday that I put up actually gives you a lot of the receipts on that. So what Trump is doing is he's created a board of peace because he wants to have sovereign nations in the Middle East, in these terribly damaged countries, all of them, actually acting on a sovereign basis rather than as little terrorist gangs controlled by outside forces for maximum tension in the world economy. That, in a nutshell, is what this period has been about and how he's curing it. And that means that the nations in the area get a vote as to any U.S. military action which could destabilize all of them. That's what, that's the whole picture. The Board of Peace is functioning. It's up and running. There's big fights going on with Israel within it. But his whole deal here is you guys got to solve this. We'll help as much as we can. And we're going to eliminate the bad kid on the block who's actually screwed everything up for the last 40 years. That's it in a nutshell. And it has enormous positive impacts for us because out of it, we've gained almost $1 trillion in investment, which was going to the city of London, which is now coming to the good old United States of America to build factories, to do all of these other things under Trump's economic program. Now, the other thing that people are obviously honed in on, the president's honed in on, is battleground Michigan. The real test of the United States and the principles of our Constitution against people who are openly saying they want to blow up the whole deal and somehow start over again. That's what this whole DSA business is about. We'll get into it a little bit more in the broadcast, but I just wanted Adam to play a little bit of a piece by J.D. Vance yesterday. And, it sort of gives you the background to what this phenomenon actually is. So go ahead and play JD, Adam.
A lot of young Americans were sold a whole promise at the elite universities in our country. And that promise is that they were going to be able to go to college, get a degree, and everything was going to work out fine for them. I think in reality, actually, a lot of universities sold these kids a bill of goods. They gave them a lot of debt. They did not give them useful skills or a useful credential. And a lot of these kids are very angry. But that really is, if you look at the data, Laura, the base of the Democratic Party today is downwardly mobile, hyper-progressive, well-educated people. People, I think, who are sold a bill of goods by universities have a lot of debt, but not a good job to show for it. A lot of the young.
So I think that's a pretty good description in a nutshell of why these guys are actually attracting votes. They've been around for a very, very long time. We'll probably get into it in answers to questions. It's not like the DSA is some new phenomenon that just jumped out on us. They've been around in the form they are since 1982. They're a combination of European socialism, particularly the British Labour Party and the Fabian Society, and the New Left in the United States, a pretty toxic brew. But I'll let Susan sort of take it up now in terms of what's really going on in Michigan and how we're going to confront this thing, which is going to be, as everybody says, a major test for the entire future of the United States.
Yeah, I want people to pay close attention to what J.D. Vance said, right? That the votes that these candidates like El Sayed are getting is downwardly mobile. In other words, they got sold the bill of goods in terms of their college degrees, and now they can't get jobs. Progressives. Now, somebody in the chat, Free Spirit, thank you, very important comment. She said, there 2% of the population is Muslims in Michigan. How did they happen to win so much up there? Because if every single Muslim voted for Abdul El Sayed, he wouldn't have won. She's absolutely right. It's not the Muslims. I mean, a lot of them voted for El Sayed. A lot of them didn't. I happen to know that for a fact. But what did vote for El Said is this layer of downwardly mobile people, largely from the well-educated class, but also people from blue-collar areas and so on, who have the young people who have never seen a functioning economy. So they think that being downwardly mobile is the way that this system has worked. I mean, just to put a very fine point on it, if you go look at Abdul El Said's vote in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, which is like the wilderness, he got large votes in the Upper Peninsula. Believe me, they do not have mosques, maybe one or two, in the entire Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This question of I think this question of downwardly mobile is a very, very precise formulation by the vice president. And that's what this crowd is mobilizing on. But I want to take it from the following standpoint, because I think that the deliberate emergence of this DSA socialist phenomenon, which is not coming from some communist Politburo someplace. It's coming right out of the City of London. It's coming right out of the Davos crowd. It's coming right out of the globalist crowd. Why? Why are they doing this? Well, there's an underlying question which is valid, which is that the system that people have lived under, especially from 1971, or even more especially since the advent of NAFTA in the 1990s, until Donald Trump's second term, where he's trying to reverse it, the system that people have lived under doesn't work. It is rigged. Free trade, globalization, green energy, the financialization of everything in order to feed a financial parasite sitting in the City of London with their little brothers in Wall Street and elsewhere. That system doesn't work. It is rigged. It's rigged against the average person. It's certainly rigged against what you would call the working class, or people who would like to be the working class if you actually had jobs that would support them. Now, what did Donald Trump do? Donald Trump came along in 2016 and started identifying the fact that this system is rigged. He went after the globalists. He got elected on the basis of the fact that he was standing up to the globalists and he was standing up to the uniparty. Now, he wasn't allowed to do a whole lot in his first administration. We all know how that history worked. He was denied his immediate second administration. Now he's back with his actual third administration, but now he's back and he is implementing, as no president has done in 100 years, an anti-globalist policy with tariffs, with rechanneling investment into the United States, with a focus on rebuilding the kind of jobs in this country where one income can raise a family. A lot of that is going to have to do with a shift towards skilled trades, very highly technically skilled trades, I might add, and away from the whole service sector, college graduate, PhD in socially relevant gender studies as it relates to 19th century African cultures. That shift people's ability to have a career in something which is useful, something which is going to pay well, and something which is not going to be taken away by AI. As Mike Rowe keeps saying, the kind of skill trade jobs that are out there are six-figure AI-proof jobs. That's what this administration is committed to. And they're doing it if you bother to pay any attention whatsoever. But of course, we know what the problem is, that our industrial economy and our workforce has been gutted over 3 or 4 decades. And you don't just bring it all back to life in less than 2 years. But the foundation is there, the directionality is there, that future is there again. Now, what's the entire narrative out there? The entire narrative that the DSA is feeding off of is, of course, this hasn't kicked in yet. Prices are still high in areas, the jobs aren't there in areas, because again, you don't just turn a huge aircraft carrier, which is the United States within the world economy, that's been speeding in one direction for 40 years, you don't turn it on a dime. So they're taking the advantage of that, but they also recognize something. They recognize that Donald Trump was right in attacking the fact that the system was rigged. And I think it's going to be critical for the president's team, for other candidates, and this is what we will be doing, is making absolutely clear that the system is rigged. I mean, I was outside the polls on Tuesday, campaigning for my husband, who was running for state rep, and he won his primary, yay. But I was in the same area in the polling places as the person who was campaigning for Abdul el-Sayed. And she had a very sophisticated rap, because every so often she would say, we need to bring down the system. And the young people were all in. Now, they're not wrong, except they think that the system that they want to bring down is the system that our country has flourished on. The system they need to bring down is the one that Donald Trump is bringing down, which is this globalist free trade financier system, and replace it with the kind of policies that actually will revive this outlook in the United States. That's what the el-Sayed crowd and the Democratic Socialists are playing off of. And again, they are not being run by some communist politburo. I don't know from where, because you don't have a communist politburo in Moscow anymore. They're being run by the City of London. They're being run by the globalists, because they saw how effective Trump has been in terms of addressing the fact that their globalist system is rigged, and he's bringing into being another one. They are riffing off of that to try and recapture people with this ridiculous, communist, socialist, capitalism, corporate, this free, this person who was campaigning for Abdul Sayed was saying, Medicare for all, no corporate payouts, money in your pockets. What does that even mean? Well, it means it's going to take it out of my pocket and put it in your pocket, probably. But that's what they're feeding off of. It's, honestly, there is a problem with the Muslim Brotherhood. There is a problem with radical Muslims, whether it's in Dearborn, Michigan, where they're not the majority, or whether it's in, with Hezbollah or Hamas. But that's not what got Abdul el-Sayed elected. So don't get hung up on that, because you're not going to get anywhere. What got him elected was this very sophisticated, or attempted to be sophisticated, narrative that the global elite are pushing into this to try and grab onto the disaffection of the downwardly mobile. Now, I don't think we're going to rescue anytime soon the college-educated downwardly mobile. Maybe some. We believe in redemption. But I think what we can do, and this is where the question of Michigan comes in extremely important, what we can do is we can win the downwardly mobile young people from blue collar, middle class, and not just young people, and make clear to them that the real solution to what they're feeling is the return of the American system, the return of blue collar jobs where one income can raise a family, the return of an idea that you have a mission for yourself. So what I want to do, yesterday, my husband and I were at the Michigan Victory Luncheon, because as people probably saw, we did decide on our gubernatorial candidate, who will be running against Jocelyn Benson, who's just a sort of white bread female version of Abdul el-Sayed. John James won for the Republican governor's nomination, and Mike Rogers who is running against Abdul el-Sayed. He didn't have an opponent in the primary, so he was already out of the box campaigning. But Rogers held a victory luncheon yesterday, a unity luncheon yesterday for the Republican Party leaders and activists and candidates and so on, so we could get out of the box running. And I think what both John James said in terms of addressing this socialist question, and then what Mike Rogers said in terms of what it is we have to give back to people and what our actual message is to those people who have been screwed by the fact that the system is rigged and that we're giving them real solutions to this. I think it's extremely important. I hope that candidates around the rest of the country pay attention to how these candidates in Michigan are messaging. I think we've had a lot to do with that because this has been our message for years and years, but especially since Donald Trump came back into office, that this is a new Republican Party, a party of workers, an inclusive party of anybody who wants to be productive, who wants to provide their children for a better future. So Adam, if I want to share the screen. Oh, I guess I got to hit that button first. Share screen. Oh. Hang on. Since I'm in Safari, I'm now not necessarily set up to do this. I hope we can make this work.
While we're waiting, everyone, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in. I have to give some super chat, some thanks. So first off, as people have noticed, some of you have noticed, I'm actually broadcasting 2 streams simultaneously on YouTube. I'm broadcasting versus a traditional TV widescreen format, and I'm also simulcasting a vertical format. Now, I kind of decided to do this at the last second, so I don't have a unified chat window, so I'm kind of jumping between the 2 chats here. That'll be fixed up in the future. So first, I want to give a shout out. Thank you very much, Susan Hogan, for you're watching on the vertical stream. So I know people like the vertical stream. Thank you so much. Virginia primary was a joke. I work the elections and 172 out of 2,700 showed up. They did not know the candidates or that there was a primary. Pretty sure it's due to GOP an earlier election in April that confused everyone. I'll be at your boot camp this week. Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us. Susan, any thoughts on that one?
Well, it is a problem where you don't have some, very high we had a huge voter turnout here because people knew that the race between Abdul al-Sayed and the traditional, albeit completely inadequate candidate, Haley Stevens, was a decisive fight. So you had, I think, 1.6 million people voted in the Democratic primaries and about 900,000 voted in the Republican primaries. And some people are kind of, their hair's on fire. Oh my God, they outnumbered us. Yeah, well, half of those people who voted in the Democratic primary voted against Abdul al-Sayed, and they are not happy, which means those are the people that we can bring in to this new Republican Party of Donald Trump. So yeah, but if you don't have a high profile race, and midterms are often quite dismal, and I'm sure that's what happened in Virginia. You do not, and obviously your Democratic Party is hideous, and your Republican Party, from what I've seen, has been pretty damn incompetent. So it doesn't surprise me. Adam, I think I have that ready to go. There we go. All right, I'm going to start with a couple of excerpts from John James's comments at the event yesterday.
It's not going to play the audio.
Oh, it's not.
The only way to share audio is through a tab. Sorry.
All right, well, then we're not going to do this. We shifted browsers, and so things were not quite right. But what John James addressed, I thought extremely powerfully, is the point that Barbara and I are both making, that you can't just fight socialism by being against it. You have to give people a mission. You have to let them know that they're not victims and they're not losers. And at one point he addressed young people, and he said, we have to tell our young people that they are in the Creator's image and they have a role to play in this world. And that's what we have to bring back to them. And I think that infused the entire discussion. Mike Rogers talked about the hideous education crisis here in Michigan, where we've dropped from the top 10 to 46, where 2/3 of our young people can't read beyond the 4th grade level. And that if you can't read above the 4th grade level, you have a 70% chance of being on welfare or going to prison. And he very eloquently made the point that the Democrats are okay with condemning our children to poverty and prison. We're not okay with that. And he said the question of making sure that children can read and participate in society, he called the new civil rights issue of today. Now, this is the kind of messaging that is going to sweep up the part of the population which is not seduced by Abdul el-Sayed and these democratic socialists. And I believe that if we channel the actual policies of what this administration is doing, what these two candidates in Michigan are now talking about in terms of bringing the United States back to being a functioning country, then those people who are downwardly mobile, who are not brainwashed liberals, are going to come over to our side in droves. And that's how we're going to make it too big to rig in places like Wayne County.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you very much, Barbara. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, drop us a quick like. On x.com, give us a quick share. I'd also like to give a thank you to AWOL Stu and to Dane Hedgepeth. Thank you so much for joining us, Dane and AWOL Stu. Love having you here. And then on the other stream, I have Paul Trainer. Thank you very much for joining us, Paul. Melody Hart, thank you for joining us every week. And Kevin asks, why is Trump, Netanyahu, and MBS not aiding the Kurdish alliance and other rebels in Iran and the IRGC militia coup d'etat by giving their arms, intel, and air support?
I think that can be answered by what Trump said last night. He doesn't necessarily want to have a ongoing war which lasts forever in the Middle East. His goal is peace. I know that there's a lot of stuff out there about, the Kurds and Baluchistan and other people now attacking Iran and the IRGC on the ground with boots on the ground. I don't even know if that's happening. I do think there's a possibility that it is happening. But the whole point here is, how do we get stability into this area? And I always bring it back to economics. Okay, the one thing which struck me as absolutely true in terms of the president coming into office is what Scott Bessent says Donald Trump asked him. He said, the world economy is completely, I'm not going to use the term he used, is completely screwed because of the level of debt and all of these things which have gone on for the last 40 years. How do we actually change it for the good without creating a depression and a blowout? And that's a very, very difficult, sophisticated maneuver. But if you think about the Strait of Hormuz and you look at what's happened in terms of the world economy, simply because of that one choke point in the world economy over the last period of time, how much everything gets, all of a sudden into a jam because of this choke point and this very old system, which has been in existence since 1971, where, petrodollars became the way the whole system operated, along with other scams like the carry trade. And it's not based on production, but it's created a huge amount of debt out there. And you can't just say, okay, don't pay it. You've got to figure out a way, like Hamilton did, of actually working it through with real production. So his goal here is not to, basically create another war in the Middle East, which will last forever. His whole goal here is forcing the nations in the region to come to terms for a permanent peace, so there is stability in the world economy in exactly the framework I'm talking about. A friend of mine once described trying to fix this in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008 as being a little bit like trying to change a car tire while the car is moving. It's kind of a difficult and very intricate process, and you need somebody who knows where all the skeletons are. I see a lot of questions in the chat about Scott Bessent and George Soros. The point is, you need somebody who's been on the inside, who knows where all of these skeletons are buried, who can actually come back on your side and start eliminating them and stabilizing the situation. So that's how I'd answer why we're not trying to go further into the Iranian situation. I really don't think we're going to be going into it from that standpoint. We might, depending on how the IRGC responds. But I tend to think that the overall impetus of this president is we're trying to get out of the Middle East militarily. We do not want to be there. Donald Trump has not wanted to be there since his first term. We're trying to extricate ourselves from the entire area, but you have to recognize the economic impact that this area has upon the entire world. And so far, he's turning it to our advantage. And that's why Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these narratives that are on the internet are so crazy because they're not even looking at the right picture.
Yeah, I just add briefly, look, think about radical Islam, the IRGC, Muslim Brotherhood, and then all their subsets like Hamas and Hezbollah. Think of those as a crafted virus. We've had a little bit of experience with crafted viruses recently, haven't we? Which has been inserted into the Middle East by the British Empire. Donald Trump understands that. That's why they've banned the Muslim. That's why they've declared the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. It's why Donald Trump's first trip in his first term was to Saudi Arabia to read the riot act to the Saudis. You're going to stop supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and they did. The amount of actions by those groups pretty much died up. And what he has been doing very deliberately in his first term, where you didn't see that much of it, and now in his second term, where you're seeing it very obviously, is he's going after this imported virus of radical Islamic fundamentalism throughout the Mideast and trying to create the conditions where stable sovereign nations can function. Many of them might someday become secular nations, as they used to be before the British came in and started pushing political Islam as the tool that they wanted to use in the Mideast. So if you start from that standpoint, that's the battlefield you're on. And you look at the crisis in Iran, is Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get rid of the disease without killing the patient, which is the people of Iran and their nation and their beautiful heritage and an economic system, some of which is in the hands of the IRGC, which is a problem. But he's trying to get rid of the disease and not kill the patient. If you start from that standpoint, I don't find what he's doing at all mysterious. I don't see him, as people say, he's flip-flopping or he's losing or he's this. No, he's trying to cure the disease in this country. And this is one of the last major infections of this disease in the region. So that's how I look at it.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Kevin, for your questions. I have one from McDuff lives. How do data centers, CBDC, Peter Thiel vax mandates, and JD Vance contribute to anti-globalism? It looks to me like they are building a panopticon. Thank you in advance. We get Barbara, Susan. This is a common theme that we get in our questions and everything. You want to take this one?
Well, let's talk about the Panopticon first, since a lot of people don't know what that's referring to. That was a design for a prison by none other than the head of British intelligence at the time, called Jeremy Bentham. And the idea was that the prisoners would be in open cells where they could be observed by the guards at all times. And that meant, since they knew they were being watched all the time, that they would behave, according to Bentham. Now, I don't think, there's a lot of things strung together here in terms of the Panopticon. Data centers. We need to basically have a massive increase in our electrical grid so that we have AI. The president has actually said that these data centers, to the extent that they're being built by the major players in Silicon Valley, have to basically have their own electricity and not take it from the grid. That promise by the majors like Google, Amazon, Meta, etc., they've all signed on to that idea that they're going to produce their own electricity. A lot of the things which are coming out about the data centers, and a lot of that campaign is being run by people who do not want the United States to win the competition with China. Kevin O'Leary, who a lot of people may know from Shark Tank, actually was building a data center in Utah. And all of a sudden, he started getting a huge amount of criticism on the internet from bots, etc. So he did what any smart person would do. He went out and hired a cyber firm to figure out where the hell this was coming from, since it was not actually there locally. He was sort of being the good guy, providing his own water sources and everything else to actually do this. And he discovered that indeed this is coming from China. Well, why would they do that? Well, obviously, we're in a race with them in terms of who's going to basically perfect this technology and its applicability first. And whoever does that is going to be in a very significant place in the world in terms of power. Peter Thiel, yes, he gave J.D. Vance his first job. Do I think that J.D. Vance is sort of with, Peter Thiel and all of the, basic ways that Peter Thiel thinks at this point? I don't think so. And a lot of people basically talk about Peter Thiel and everything else as being, the key providers of surveillance technologies like Palantir to the Defense Department. Well, guess what, guys? Palantir's technologies actually seem to work very efficiently in terms of warfare. All right. And that's kind of what we're in at this point in terms of how military strategies are being formulated for the next generation. And I tend to think that a lot of this stuff that's out there to get your knickers in a knot, have to do, first of all, with what we just came through. I try to emphasize to people all the time, think about everything we know about the situation we just came through under Joe Biden before Donald Trump. Panopticon, you betcha. If you really look at that, that was essentially what was being built. And Trump came in and has basically put that in the rearview mirror, in my view. Vax mandates, Biden. All of this stuff that's being talked about here is, basically, the globalist framework. And I think J.D. Vance is playing a very, very significant role in changing all of that. And he's very aware of where this is coming from. Adam, I'd like to play that Bishop Barron clip with J.D. at this point so that people actually take this in and think about it a little bit.
This is a very formative thing for me. So I just became, I was, young. Yeah. So this is a very formative thing for me. So I just become a United States Senator. Yeah. I was, young, I was sort of up and coming, and I go to the security conference, which really it's the defense conference in the world, especially for the United States and its allies. And of course, the Ukraine conflict is sort of top of mind there in Munich, but there are a lot of other sort of bigger and deeper questions, like what does the Western Alliance stand for? And what I realized is there is an extraordinary Christian foundation to the entire Western Security Alliance. Like the person who founded the Munich Security Conference was one of the Christians who was involved in the attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And he was one of the
Yeah.
few who survived. But then you actually look at, that early post-war Western Alliance. Look at Eisenhower,
Yeah.
some of the things that he said. I mean, he
Deeply religious
He would be
in his-
called a theocrat
Right.
if you gave anything like Eisenhower's speeches
Or
today.
Konrad Adenauer on the German side, right?
Absolutely. But all of these Western leaders, they thought that they were creating something very influenced, founded on a Christian concept. And now, and what I saw in Munich was a certain sense of tragedy or sorrow. There was a nostalgia for that era. Like the Western Alliance in 1950 was so strong, and everybody felt, and this is, I guess, in 2023, well, now it's so weak. And I was kind of struck by the fact that people weren't asking the question, well, what had really changed about the West from 1955 to 2023?
It's obvious what
And
changed.
it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
It's that our society's kind of lost that binding moral vision, that unifying moral vision, and they were trying to recapture all of the good things out of it without the underlying foundation. And they're almost, there was something, because I went into this conference and I remember I was kind of angry at them. I felt they were naive. I felt like they were dumb. I felt like they weren't really understanding what was really going on in the world. And I came out actually with this deep sense of respect, but also sorrow, because they're nostalgic for a world that doesn't exist anymore, but they can't
don't know
quite bring
how to get it
themselves
back.
to get it back.
That's the key thing right there. They can't quite bring themselves to get it back in terms of the kinds of situations with what is the DSA? Where does it come from? What is this International Socialist Alliance that it comes out of? What is the British Labour Party? It's all a war on the idea of Western civilization in its highest form. They are openly saying, and the DSA says this in one of their New York candidates, we're out to destroy Western civilization. Wow. What does that mean? Well, we've been undergoing that process. This is not new. We've been undergoing that process since 1971, when environmentalism became the new religion of the United States, along with feminism, and all of these other attacks on the family, zero population growth, each hoax piled on another in terms of, we've gone all the way from we need zero population growth because the world doesn't have enough resources to feed high levels of population, to the climate apocalypse hoax, which is at the center in many respects of what these people actually also believe today. If you actually believe that the world's going to end in 5 years, are you going to start a family? Are you going to actually think about starting a career? Do you actually plan on that basis? I mean, this is really sophisticated brainwashing. And going back to the previous question, again, you talk about the Panopticon, that's what we've been living through. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is destroying right now. And it's why we have to come in and, apply all of the things that we need to apply to also destroy this tendency. And I think both J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have a very deep understanding of the role of religion, the role of civil society, and not government, but the kinds of ideas which actually used to exist in the United States, where you had actual social relationships, either in the church or, in all of these various social clubs, like the Elks of all things, and things like this, which just no longer exist. Everybody's isolated and staring at a computer for the most part. And that's really what we've got to actually think through in terms of how do we get that social cohesion back. And a great deal of it is, very inspiring. And the terrible tragedy of Charlie Kirk's assassination, I wear this shirt because I actually want to remember that moment a lot. you know, what happened is young people started returning to the church. They started reading the Bible. They started thinking about what is this thing called Western civilization that everybody talks about? We need to destroy it. And I think when you get on that deep level, that's where you actually start to bring these people back from all the brainwashing they've actually been through.
Yeah, Adam, could you put the question back on this on there that we've been referencing? Look, I want to address this from a methodological standpoint. Look at that question. It's a bunch of nouns. Data centers, CBDC, Peter Thiel, vax mandates, JD Vance. And the implication is that somehow those nouns are all connected, and that connection means therefore you are a globalist. That's just not the way the world works. You know, the question of data centers, and there's a lot going on in the chat there. Obviously, data centers have to be built responsibly. Should not be in some suburban family's backyard. Duh. It needs to provide its own energy. It does. They are closed loop water systems by and large. That's kind of a spurious thing. States are largely responsible for how to deal with data centers, although the president has intervened with his Ratepayer Protection Act to get a lot of these hyperscalers and others and utilities to sign a pledge, which is all he can do at the federal level, by the way, to sign a pledge that they will provide their own energy and not actually draw from the grid. So is there a way to build data centers responsibly? Yes, there is. Are we in the middle of a fight to figure out how to do that and to implement it? Yes, we are. So that's one side of it. But then the other implication is data centers equal surveillance. Well, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. A data center is like a gun. It depends on who's using it. You want to take all our guns away because people use them to murder people? Or do you want to create a citizenry that knows how to use its guns? And it's the same thing for data centers. So there's an implication in the way the question is formed, which is actually the most dangerous part of how the enemy controls us. Yeah, a surveillance state would be terrible, but they've already done a lot of damage. They've already done a lot of damage by removing a certain ability to think through processes, principles, which all live in the world of verbs, not nouns, which is what actually defines the world. Because the real fight in the world, as we've said many times, and we're going to say it again, it's between two images of man. Do you believe that man is in the image of the Creator and he has the responsibility to continue God's creation, which means using your mind to discover new principles, build new things, provide real education to unlock the further creative powers of people within your civilization and, frankly, around the world? That's one image. That's the basis upon which the American Republic was created. The other image is we're all animals, and the oligarchs, the elites, they're going to control us. They're going to control everything, whether it's money or resources or information, and they control all of us to manipulate us like, a bunch of guinea pigs in a cage. Those are the two images of man. That's where you start in evaluating things. So you take somebody like JD Vance. You can string a bunch of adjectives and nouns next to his name and say, oh, these are bad adjectives and nouns, and therefore I'm throwing them out. Or you can constantly test what he is saying, what he is doing, how he is changing, which I honestly find very refreshing. The fact that he has changed, I think, says something about the human mind. You could say, oh, well, he's a Manchurian, he's a plant. Someone said he's Pence too. Well, if you live in the world in which you're suspicious of everything, I feel sorry for you because you're going to be pretty miserable. I live in a world where I think powerful, good ideas backed by passionate people can actually change the way other people think and act. And if I didn't think that, I would have quit this fight a long time ago. But start with the principles as opposed to a bunch of emotional-laden adjectives and nouns, and then think through what is the implication of that. CBDC. This administration is against CBDC. So why is that even in there? Why? Because maybe Peter Thiel once said CBDC and J.D. Vance once worked for Peter Thiel, and therefore this administration is for CBDC. This is not an effective way to think about the fight before us. We have a big fight. It's a historic fight. It is the fight between two images of man. And that's where people have to start when they start analyzing anything. You know, people ask us, how do you know what you know? You know, you must have connections to the Trump administration. You must be getting secret intelligence. No, none of the above. We start with that methodology. And we've also been at it for a long time. So we have a certain kind of understanding of how that methodology, if you stick to it, is going to give you a much better picture of how the world works, but more importantly, a much more powerful way of intervening into it.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, McDuff Lives. I saw your responses in the chat. I would take some more, but I have some more super chats. Thank you very much for joining us today. Our next live political briefing, our next pre-recorded political briefing is going to be released on Saturday. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We do 3 political updates a week, plus this live show on Thursday. And if our audience didn't yet know, I think we have a bunch of new people watching us on the vertical stream. We have a free email newsletter. I have both a daily and a weekly subscription. And if you would like to support us with a $10 a month contribution, just go to the link in the description of the broadcast. Actually, I think I might have to check the description of the broadcast for the vertical stream, but the link's in the description. Search the web for Promethean Action, become a free or paying subscriber to our newsletter. Again, we have a daily and a weekly subscription. So thank you, McDuff Lives. I'm going to bring up James. Thank you for joining us, James, and being a little bit patient here today. We have a bunch of super chats ready. Do you guys think Trump's ultimate plan is to bring us back to common law and get rid of the corporation known as the U.S. government? Is that the real reason Trump is trying to bring back the American system? Thank you very much, James, for asking your question and being honest about it. Barbara, how would you answer this question?
Well, I always go to the Constitution itself, which is kind of the antithesis of common law. Common law is an import from the British system. And, I don't know why people kind of, think that it's great. All it is customary law in terms of various civil society relationships going back centuries and brought over here to essentially handle what I would call the routine stuff in society, i.e. divorces, marriages, this type of stuff. The Constitution is based on the other branch, the truly revolutionary branch of British law, which was brought over there, called the equity courts. In other words, what is natural law? What is it? How does the universe actually work? Are we in coherence with natural law? The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were really, really focused on that, and they invented something entirely new, which is the Constitution defines the United States of America, not corporate law. All right, and people really like these legalisms. All right, and I don't like them. I've spent a great deal of time reading law in my lifetime. I find all common law to be essentially completely boring because what is it? It's precedent. All right, it's the idea that we're in a closed system. All right, in which we follow custom from 20, 30, 40 years ago. How long did it take the Supreme Court to actually get rid of the Dred Scott decision? It took a war to get rid of that, which was fundamentally at war with what we are as a nation. So I'm not a big fan, as you can probably tell, of common law. I'm a big fan of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and I think people should really study that and see its relationship, to the courts of equity, if you want to take something from the British, which is, what's good and what's right, and how do you actually think about that? How do you make new law? How do you remedy, as you know, John Marshall famously said about equity, for every wrong, there is a remedy. How do you find the remedy? Well, that you have to get down deep into principles, and it really has to be thinking about how natural law, the laws of nature, actually work. Elon Musk is very famous for saying in real natural law, i.e. in physics, either something works in nature or it doesn't, and everything else is merely advisory. And I put the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence on the same pedestal.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And thank you, James, for joining us today. Again, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Consider getting our free newsletter. Love having you here. Thanks for joining us. Okay, I'm going to take this next question, and I'm going to take 2 questions from our email newsletter, which haven't even taken any questions yet. Thank you, everyone, for being so patient. All right, so I have a question here, a comment from Candice. Love the work you're doing using the materials with our group at the Michigan Eagle Forum. Thank you. Thank you very much, Candice, for joining us. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take 2 questions here talking about what are we going to do? What can be done about the midterms? So first question here from Rosie. How can we get the talking points that Republicans need to be speaking on? Colorado needs help. Oh, yes, it does. Absolutely. And Van says, I love listening to the 3 of you, but I have some advice to get people motivated for the midterms. You can tell people about the economy and the jobs all you wish, but to get them motivated to go vote, let them know that the only way they can get people held accountable is to win the House and the Senate in large numbers, so the crooked judges can be impeached. The accountability problem is actually the biggest thing to almost everyone. If you can add that to your messaging platform, you will create a positive movement to get people excited to vote. Prices, gas, foods, job, yes, that is all good. But people want held accountable above all else. And every time a grand jury tries to do something, certain judges in D.C. have squashed the progress. Let the people know this info. It's the only way to get people excited to vote, as accountability and possible arrests are the number 1 on regular voters' mind. Thank you, Van.
All right. No, I appreciate what Van has said in terms of how to address the accountability question. It's very adult. Thank you, Van, by making the point that it is up to us in the midterm elections to actually change the legal landscape, because you're not going to get accountability on the legal landscape as it now exists. We've got to win the midterms. We've got to make sure that the Republicans and a better class of Republicans stay in control, and then they start giving Donald Trump the kind of judges and prosecuting DAs and other things, or federal attorneys and so on, that he needs. So I very much appreciate your proactive approach to that, rather than, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump because he hasn't sent everybody to jail. But to put that together with the other one, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with you on it being the most important issue if you're talking to people who are not Republicans. It may absolutely be the case, what you're saying, with a certain layer of the MAGA base, and they are going to have to be motivated, and they are going to have to be inspired to go out and vote. But I was at the polls on Tuesday, and I did not find a whole lot of people all that interested in the question of accountability. The people who were coming to the polls here in Michigan, in a blue-collar district, which is where I am, and again, these are the swing voters that are going to make the difference in this election campaign. Yes, we do. You're right. We have to get all the Republicans out. And what you're saying about this is an aspect of it. And I'm not dismissing it. But I am saying it's not enough. Because if you're going to get what are called the persuadables or the independents or the Democrats who are now freaked out about people like Abdul el-Sayed to come out and actually vote, you're going to have to address these questions of the economy. Now that gets to the question of the talking points that the previous questioner asked. And thank you, Candice, for getting our half-page flyer out. Adam, if you could share the screen, because we're now shifting to our Promethean Pack part of your programming. Again, just to make clear for people who may be joining us for the first time, we have two organizations. Promethean Action, which is what is broadcasting this, is our policy arm. We discuss the fight in the nation and in the world from the standpoint of policy. But in order to intervene into a federal election, as the midterms are, you have to have a federally constituted political action committee, which we do, and it is called Promethean PAC. And Promethean PAC has been extremely busy since the beginning of this year, doing two things. One is providing talking points in the form of half-page flyers for our activists out there. And in a minute, we'll share the screen where you can see where you can order this half-page flyer. This is our latest one, which gives people a sense of what the transformation actually is. And on the back, we bring some of the receipts. What has already happened under this Trump administration, which is really amazing given the short time. The fact that we are outproducing Japan in steel production for the first time in 27 years. So for one of those 19-year-olds who's being seduced by socialism, they've never seen anything like this. And if it's not in your backyard, our job is to make sure that you see it going on nationally. But you see the other things, which this administration has done. So this is one layer of talking points, which you can get to people. This is something which the candidates here in Michigan are beginning to pick up on. Both John James and Mike Rogers are picking up on the fact that this is passing us by because we are a blue state. So we have the blue state blues here, and that you need leadership in Michigan, in Connecticut, in California, in the other blue states that will work with the president to bring about this industrial transformation. So that's one of the things that we're doing in terms of, we can stop sharing the screen. Oops. That's one of the things that we're doing. The other thing that we're doing is our midterm boot camp, which again, you can pull up the LaRouche PAC site, Adam. The midterm boot camp is something that we conduct every single week. On Monday night at 8 o'clock. It's a Zoom call with now over between 300 and 400 and sometimes 500 people from around the country, candidates, political activists, just plain old American citizens, figuring out how they can effectively intervene into these campaigns. So we talk about the ideas, we talk about the messaging, we hear, oh, I forgot to change that. The next one is August 10th. We talk about, we hook people up with other people in their state so that they can work effectively. So if you want to be part of the organizing intervention into the midterm elections, go to Promethean PAC and sign up for our midterm boot camp.
Yes. So the website is up top if you're on vertical. If you're on horizontal widescreen, it's there, prometheanpack.com. Again, we do them every Monday. The link is in the menu. So join our midterm boot camp. We have plenty of questions this week. We get over generally close to 100, a little over 100 questions a week. Let's go to the main fight here, which I think this question sums it up pretty well. Very prescient. Oh, StreamYard. Very prescient question here from Brett, I believe the aggressive, fast-paced nature of Donald Trump and his explosive fast track of his engineered war on our true enemy has resulted on the following. One, proof that Trump is not shooting from the hip. This plan has been formulated over time, and he is simply playing it out. Number two, he has caught the enemy off guard and on their heels. I believe they were also attempting to orchestrate a long-term plan that would have been a push, a dump, and a blind nation into a globalist dump heap. Instead, what we are seeing is a king with no clothes. They are fragmented and clumsily trying to regroup around Canada when they actually look like buffoons devoid of any common sense and stuttering over their rehearsed empty dialogue. Unfortunately, they own the media that keeps dropping the curtain to hide the slapback routine and make excuses for them. Wake up, America. Your thoughts, Barbara and Susan.
I think he's very perceptive. It's very clear, and even Kimberly Strassel at the Wall Street Journal actually said this last week. I was kind of shocked because she said, "Hey, what do you mean no plan? We haven't essentially suffered all that much. Yes, people are suffering from a short-term high gas prices or semi-high gas prices, but they're not as high as under Biden." And it's very clear that Trump's first steps was establish energy dominance. Once we are sure that we can withstand this thing in terms of resilience, let's basically go after this incredible globalist financial regime, which was strangling our economy. Now, there's a lot of myths out there that somehow we could be like Robinson Crusoe. I mean, I think that's the way that MTG actually thinks about this. We're on this isolated island. We could just make our own decisions and, implement them. And that's what America First is about. That's not what Trump is actually thinking. Think about it. He knows who tried to assassinate him. He knows who tried to put him in jail for the rest of his life. He studied the enemy. He actually knows where it's coming from. And he's so far actually beaten them in their first operation, which is, again, put him in jail for the rest of his life or kill him. That he's very aware may not last forever because we're in a war at this point. And how much people actually step up and realize the stakes and what he's fighting about, the better off we're going to be. All of our finances at the point that Trump came into office were not controlled by a sovereign United States. The Federal Reserve was in enemy hands, as it has been. The globalist, environmental movement had mostly seized world credit. The IMF and World Bank and all these other things are largely British-oriented institutions at this point around the idea of zero population growth, and there have to be limits on growth. If it gets out of control, the oligarchy can't actually run things anymore. That's kind of the heart of their basic strategy. And so what he's done is, quite frankly, from the standpoint of retrospect, actually quite elegant. He is gradually taking down this entire brutal slave system, which is what it is. Think about it. What happened in 1971 when the Bretton Woods system was destroyed? We got environmentalism. We got drugs. We got hedonism to the highest extent from Hollywood. We got this whole idea that you are your chromosomes. Or not, maybe not. That's the debate, isn't it? Are you that? Or, it's all crazy nonsense, which has nothing to do with the fundamental mission as our founders conceived it of the United States. Go forth, multiply, and subdue the earth. That's, basically what's at the heart of Trump, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, the entire cabinet at this point. Every nation on earth, as a result of this destruction at this point, is facing a huge demographic crisis. Our population is not at replacement levels. That was deliberate. What happens when, are you going to have Social Security if you don't have people working because there's not enough people to work? Are you going to flood your country with immigrants because the labor force can't actually meet the demand at this point? All of these things were created by what I call literally a slave system. And that's what's a modern, very sophisticated one. But that's what the president is out to overturn. And, I really think that people have to take into account, as our very perceptive, questioner did, exactly the elegance of the solution which the president is pursuing. But it is a war. It's a shooting war. There's no guarantees. Scott Bessent just intervened in Japan. Japan crashes, what happens to the United States? Well, you set off kind of a chain reaction collapse because Japan holds, I guess it's the second amount of US treasuries. And you get a actual huge financial crisis here. So there are all of these things which you don't recognize as part of the board that we're working on. But they're going to pop up because that's the nature of trying to change this entire system. And as my former friend said, changing a tire in a car which is moving. And that's what so far we're trying to do. And I think quite successfully, but we have to basically ensure that it continues by winning the midterms in overwhelming margins. A lot of people don't think about the fact of what impact that actually has. Think about right after 2024, and Trump came out and he had enormous momentum. He got all of those executive orders out there. He changed the entire environment in DC. He did all sorts of stuff because he had freedom of movement, because all of these politicians, judges, etc., said, holy cow, the American people hate the system I'm completely wedded to. They are disgusted with it. I'm scared. And if you really want to scare them to death and get things really changed, do an overwhelming vote in the midterm.
Yeah, and I'd also like to give kind of an example of how Trump thinks strategically. So one of the narratives out there is Israel convinced him to go into Iran back in February. All right, well, why don't we take some steps back in terms of what you have to do in order to deal with this IRGC problem, which has been around for 47 years. Go all the way back to the first term. What's one of the things that Donald Trump did? He established the Space Force. Remember that. We're going to come back to that. Then you come to the second term. I recently reviewed an interview that Scott Bessent did with the guys from, I guess it was the guys from way back in March of 2025, where they asked, what's the most surprising thing about your job? And he said, it's the fact that I spend 40 to 50% of my time dealing with national security matters. But then when I looked at what he said immediately after, which I think is highly important if you realize the enemy is the City of London. But what he immediately said after that, in fact, he said, I've already used sanction powers and other powers of the Treasury to go after the Iranian financing networks, which are aiding the Houthis in Yemen. So all the way a year and a half before, or a year before, we launched Operation Epic Fury, this administration was already moving on some of the financial networks that feed into this. What is one of the premier things that President Trump did when he came in his second term? He unleashed our energy production to make sure that we had a certain level of independence in terms of energy supplies, not making us reliant on the Middle East. What else did he do? Then earlier this year, or was it the end of last year? I've lost track now. It's the end of last year. Carries out the 48-minute operation into Venezuela. What did that do? Not only did it pull Maduro out, but it's part and parcel of rolling up all the dirty money networks that were going on through the Mediterranean, with Iran playing a very major role in terms of Hezbollah in Venezuela, activity in Cuba, and so on. All of this is prior to anything happening in Connecticut. And then what's the most important thing, to my thinking, that Donald Trump did 1 week before he launched Operation Epic Fury? He launched the Board of Peace. He brought together nations from the region, but from outside the region, including big Muslim nations like Indonesia and Malaysia, from outside the region, to come in and say, we want to have the capability to actually rebuild Gaza once we bring this thing to an end, to ensure that the nations of the Mideast have the capability to be sovereign, to be economically developed. He did all of that in preparation for what he finally launched on Operation Epic Fury. Now, let me just tie it up by going back to Space Force. Remember when Bibi Netanyahu came here for the Lindsey Graham funeral? I've lost track of time. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? And Bibi tries to strut his stuff by saying, well, I'm going to tell President Trump that we know what is going on at, Pickaxe Mountain. And what does Trump say? He says, I don't need Bibi to tell me anything. We have Space Force. We know everything that's going on the ground. And this campaign could not have been prosecuted without Space Force, without the financial moves being taken over a year before this thing took off, without the Board of Peace having been put in place. So you're not just destroying, but you're, again, curing a disease so that you can begin to make the entire region healthy. So, yeah, I don't think he shoots from the hip.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to our friend, Brett, for sending in your question. So these questions are coming from our email newsletter. Link, if you'd like to subscribe, is in the description. All right, so the next set of questions here is going to be on the Japanese yen and the relationship to that and world politics and finance, economics. So Casimir says, retired Brigadier General Holt Blaine on Rich Does Politics made an interesting analysis of the actions by Scott Bessent on purchasing Japanese yen. Blaine noted that this was going to create a significant shift in the financial situation. Do you have any comment on what he said? Also, thank you, Promethean crew, for bringing this light truth to us all. God bless your work. Thank you, Casimir, for sending in your question. Wendy says, hi, Adam, Susan, Barbara. I would like to know your thoughts on the whole saving the Japanese yen issue and how or if it gets related to Europe, British Empire. Is there any way that Trump can leverage to change the political scene here? Thank you for all the mind-blowing information you all bring. Much love to you all. Thank you, Wendy, for joining us and sending in the question. And says, can you speak about the economy of Japan and if they have a relationship that the UK with the UK that could impact Japan's economy and our relationship with Japan? Thank you, Anne, for sending in your question. Barbara and Susan, what's up? What's this new relationship between the United States and the Japanese yen all about?
Well, it's not really all that new. I talked about it in my video. People have to understand something about this mess, which is caused by how Japan chose to deal with existing in this globalist economic mess. And the result was that they kept their interest rates near zero for a very, very, very long time after their economy crashed back in the 1990s, thinking that that would encourage investment and growth. And the way that got manipulated by the speculators, a lot of them in Europe, Tom Luongo has pieces on this also, is that people would buy yen at zero and then turn around and invested in stocks, bonds, or treasuries or other things that were paying an interest rate and pocket the difference. In other words, exactly the type of what's called arbitrage or completely speculative gambling, which has been what people know as the present capitalist system. When young people see this kind of stuff, they say, that's capitalism. I don't like it. because it goes nowhere. What is it? It's just people making money in a gambling casino on a bet as opposed to building things. Now, what's going on is that the yen carry trade, so-called, can blow up the minute that Japan raises its interest rates, which it has to do because the economy is suffering from huge real inflation over there. And if it raises its interest rates, it helps the Japanese people and it helps its export economy. But at the same time, it blows up the world financial system potentially because of the scope of this huge speculative bet, which all of the speculators have been doing on the carry trade for years. So it was blowing up. In 2024, it wiped out trillions of dollars when it blew up the last time. Now, how did Bessent intervene? This gets very interesting. Okay, he didn't initially sell US dollars at all to prop up the yen. What did he sell? He sold euros. That's kind of interesting, isn't it, in terms of taking out the whole British financial system, of which the EU is just a captive part of that apparatus, if you will. We had to intervene. And on top of that, we're working with the Japanese to actually get them into the same kind of capital investment cycle in their own very, very advanced industries and technologies, so that they get out of this trap, which they've been in, largely caused by the current financial system. So is it going to work? Well, this is again the problem of changing that tire on the moving car. There's so much nonsense crap out there in terms of the present financial system that, you know, there's all these little bombs which you've got to diffuse without blowing up the system. And we're right now diffusing a very big one, which is the carry trade, and turning the Japanese economy for our benefit, which is what Bessent is actually doing. They're an ally, okay, a very, very important one. If you talk about, as one of the Canadian analysts I cited in my piece talked about it, you're looking towards actually creating an alternative monetary system than the one we have. And that has to be very much like what was really good about the old Bretton Woods monetary system. That is that you have to have the ability of nations to get a hold of credit for the types of capital projects we're building here at low interest rates, long term, so that they can actually build out their economies. That hasn't been the situation since 1971. The system has essentially been, how do we create debt slaves for any nation that wants to develop by forcing interest rates on them for loans that actually the loans get paid off over and over and over again, but by the functional compound interest, they still owe the money. They're debt slaves. All right. And that's what the old system created. That's what we're in the process of actually changing. And I think the ultimate vision is we're going to get a new Bretton Woods system so that nations can develop by having access to the credit they need for the major projects which are actually necessary for economic development, like infrastructure. Like in the Middle East, what do we do about the fact that we don't have any water? Well, how about nuclear power to actually do desalination? That's why Trump is talking to the Saudis about nuclear reactors at this point. That's what they need in terms of a power source to actually ensure that the entire area has water, which it doesn't have at this point. You know, and one of the things in the war which you saw is the IRGC saying, okay, Qatar, if you want to actually, or Bahrain, if you want to actually support Donald Trump, we're going to hit your desalination plants and your population won't have any water. Well, that is a very big vulnerability, isn't it? And that's what you talk about when you talk about how do these areas actually develop. And you create which is what people like MTG and all these other people don't understand. You create an actual market for our high technology goods. That's what trade is about. And the profits come back to the United States and into our economy to fund what we want to do. It's a complete opposite thing of the globalist system. So that's basically how I'd answer your question.
Yeah, and I would just add, look, I mean, this whole thing goes back to 1971 when we took the dollar off the gold reserve standard, not the gold standard, the gold reserve standard. Because what did that actually do? That's the point at which you say, all right, we're no longer going to be sovereign over our currency. We're going to throw it under the magic of the marketplace. Well, the marketplace is not magic. The market is run by powerful international financial interests who are largely concentrated in the city of London and operate on the basis of a central banking system. And what they have done over the decades since then is basically build top. Their power, their so-called wealth, is based on nominal financial values, which are just inflated hyper speculation. Where again, the whole Japanese, the yen carry trade is based on this idea. You buy the yen cheap in Japan, like at zero, and then you go reinvest them someplace else, like euro dollars, with higher interest rates. So you're making a profit by doing what? Speculating. And then someone speculates on your speculation. And then someone speculates on your speculation and, iterate that out a million times. And you have this huge financial derivatives bubble. Now, here's the problem. Here's the derivatives bubble. And here's your real economies and nations sitting on top of that derivatives bubble. What happens if you just blow the derivatives bubble? We're going to crash. So this is, as Barbara said, this is a very delicate operation. What you have to do is twofold. You have to begin to extricate your real economy from this and make sure that it's growing, which this administration is doing, while you, in a very surgical way, try and begin to let the air out of this derivatives bubble without it blowing. This is we're in a very, very delicate period of time at this point, which is why I'm very happy someone who trained under George Soros and knows how this shit works is sitting there as our Treasury Secretary.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And we also have a longtime viewer here make a comment on this. KLMN says, on the yen carry trade, Bessent has over the past year built a firewall to protect U.S. treasuries by allowing banks to hold more, up to $5 trillion more. The United States and Japanese will be okay in an unwind, whereas Europe and the UK less so. Thank you for these details. Barbara or Susan, any comment on that?
I think he's right. I just think that, we're fully armed here, folks, but the only question is the situation such that we can actually prevail in what is really a battle for our future?
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, KLMN. I also want to give a quick shout out here to Vintage voted in Tennessee the primary this morning, 99%, all read on the check-in form, then talked with a man at the park who used to be a Republican and is now a Democrat. Basically, all of his talking points came from the MSN. Yeah, so apparently the Democratic Party has lost all of its capability for independent thought. So thank you very much, Vintages. Thank you very much for joining us. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and make sure you're getting our free newsletter. Also, Christine says, you guys are amazing. Thank you for joining us, friends. Again, and whoops, I have another from the vertical super chat here. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Paul E. I don't remember seeing your name here in our show. So thank you very much, Paul E., for the generous super chat. Please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and consider getting our free email newsletter. The link is in the description. Okay, let me pull off this yen carry trade here. All right, Susan, this next question is going to be for you. I think you probably already know what it is, but I think it's an important question because obviously it comes up just so much. So this is going to be on Muslims in Michigan and specifically in Dearborn, which is a big thing for a lot of people. So Rob says, please ask Susan Kokinda to explain on a Thursday live show how the takeover of the city commissions Dearborn by Muslims and the increase of Sharia courts is not a threat to our country and culture. Thanks. Thank you, Rob. And Jim says, how do we deal with the Muslims that are in our country that do not want to assimilate to our culture, that want to replace us? Thank you, Jim, for sending in your question and your concerns.
Well,
Susan,
I appreciate Jim's, because he is making a very, very, very important distinction. Again, I've lived adjacent to Dearborn all my life growing up, and then I came back here 10 years ago. All my life growing up, there was a vibrant population in Dearborn where you heard nothing about Sharia law, the Muslim Brotherhood, taking over our institutions. These were people who came from various countries in the Mideast, Lebanon, Yemen, and others, and absolutely wanted to assimilate as Americans and partake in this great nation. One of those people, if you ever have the opportunity to hear his story, was the former mayor of Hamtramck, who was a star student in Yemen in high school, couldn't wait to graduate and go into sciences, but his family, when he was 15, said to him, you have to go to the United States and go to work in the auto plants because we can't support our family. And so he did, and then he put himself through school, at night school, and then he became a medical doctor, and then he became mayor of Hamtramck, made major contributions to the development of the city, and was one of the key people who came out and endorsed Donald Trump in 2024, the first major Muslim figure to do so, and swung a huge number of votes for Donald Trump. But his story is the story of someone who comes to the United States, assimilates, becomes part of the culture, and contributes. So I really do appreciate the fact that the questioner made that distinction. But is there another element to that? Well, obviously. That's the Minnesota situation with Ilhan Omar. That is where you do see this Biden globalist directed influx of people who are being brought in for a different political purpose. But may I make that point again? The Biden globalist influx for a political purpose, which is to destroy our culture, create the conditions for terrorism, create voting pools that can be used to augment the vote for people like the Senate candidate who won the other day, Abdul. But again, here's a thought object, because we can go back to the very beginning where Free Spirit made a very important point. The Muslim population here in Michigan is 2%. Yes, it is higher in Dearborn. I know that. But the Muslim population is 2%. Let's say they all leave, including the ones who have been here for 3 generations and are full Americans. But if we're doing a thought experiment here. If you are a practicing Muslim, get out of our country. You're gone. Boom. Okay. The globalists are still there. The rest of the socialists are still there. The rest of the globalist operations are still there. And they're still going to keep doing what they're doing. So it's a problem when you just fixate on one aspect of this. Understand the danger of these political operations, and they are dangerous, but understand that this is a political operation which can be discarded by the enemy just as quickly and easily as they created it. So please keep your focus on how we defeat the enemy. That's my point in all of this. And then one other question, one other thing, this is a legitimate question. If anybody knows where Sharia law has actually been implemented in the United States, please let me know. I honestly am not aware of it anywhere, including in Dearborn, in terms of applying this to society in general or to anybody outside of a household, where you have Muslim traditions in your household like you have Jewish traditions in your household. So if someone knows where it's actually been implemented, affecting something outside of the household, I really honestly do want to know. So let me know.
Thank you, Susan.
And I
Yeah.
will say, Gary just put in there, the Islamic takeover in Europe is real. Yes, but again, who's directing it and why? It's coming from London. It's coming from the globalists. It's not coming from somebody who's sitting there reading the Quran in Mecca.
Yeah, I just like to recommend that people, put on their reading list for the rest of the summer a work by Friedrich Schiller about the 30 Years' War in Europe, which is when, the idea of religious warfare became a dominant hybrid warfare mechanism for the elites. Because, what happened there is that the sides fought until there was no more fighting to do. They killed millions of people because each one thought, my God tells me that I'm, basically, working for him in terms of doing this war. Right now, what I see happening in terms of the United States, and this may basically upset some people and set their hair on fire, but what I see is a deliberate intelligence operation to bring the Middle East to the United States as the center of our political dialogue. Jews against Arabs and Muslims, fight it out forever, take sides, and now you're into a bloodbath potentially, which can go on and on and on. And in many respects, that's why the whole immigration thing or emigration thing happened to Europe. It's this idea we want to destroy Western civilization. Well, how do you do that? One of the ways is irresolvable warfare, because to resolve that, you have to get to some higher level between the two religions where you can actually talk about what's common between them. Now, Trump's Abraham Accords is based on the whole idea that there are three Abrahamic, or as Trump likes to say, Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And they have factors between them which are common, i.e. the belief in monotheistic religion, i.e. one God, and the belief of a Redeemer coming to basically, take on the sins of mankind. These are very high religious concepts. And the person who's trying to make peace tries to find what's common that we can draw upon to give a common footing to a new relationship. The person who wants the British form of hybrid warfare, which they've done in the Middle East, long even before Iran came into its present form of existence. And in the process, the key parts of each religion lost the centerpieces in many respects of what they actually believed in, on this higher form of what is mankind in this universe. We are not beasts out killing one another. We are God's children who are supposed to be perfecting his universe. And in many respects, this type of religious warfare just drives that entire conception out of each one of these religions. So it's a very good kind of homework assignment to take a look at what Schiller actually says happened in that horrendous talk about a forever war, 30 years and more, destroying most of the population of Europe. And, I think it's kind of a lesson for our times in terms of thinking about the present way we're all being sort of put into, religious warfare, where it really has nothing to do with the United States, with what we as a people actually believe in. So that's how I'd answer that question.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan. Just as a quick historical angle, because I think this is an important thing to add, especially about the 30 Years' War. It was the 30 Years' War that gave us what we consider today to be modern diplomacy. The idea of the benefit of the other, that we have to respect other nations' sovereignty. All of these ideas that we consider to be modern diplomacy, how nations try to work out their differences, all of this came out of the Treaty of Westphalia and its solution. So I remember Tony Blair famously said in the early 2000s, late 1990s, that he wanted to end the Treaty of Westphalia. He wanted to end the peaceful system that resolved the 30 Years' War. So this 30 Years' War is a major part of modern history, the lead up to the founding of the United States. So people should definitely read it. It's on Project Gutenberg. It's completely free. Although I think there are several translations, though, so I'm not certain which one's the best one. So thank you very much. We're going to continue here. I'm going to take a question to go back on a more domestic issue here. Let me take off this banner. All right, so question number 1. Again, StreamYard. Yay. Okay. All right. Johan says, hi, guys. With President Trump now attacking the city of London on so many fronts, think we all feel things are really coming to a head now. I am very concerned, and America's enemy from within, meaning the communists from Cuba. I'm still really shocked at finding out California's mayor was training there. Truly unbelievable how she got in such a high position. What do you see the president can or will need to do to cripple Cuba's corrupt government? City of London government, because Cuba is so very close to America, and it seems communists have flooded into America. Thank you guys for everything you do and all your hard work, research, and bringing us your brilliant and informative presentations. God bless you, Johan from UK. Thank you, brother, for sending in your question. So what is this threat of the Democratic Socialist America's connection to the Communist Party in Cuba?
Well, Secretary Rubio recently released a report. It was also came through the Office of Terrorism concerning how the Cuban government has actually influenced the left in the United States. And it's a pretty devastating report. They actually managed to get people who were communists from Cuba acting as agents of the Cuban government at very high-level positions in our State Department, kind of echoing the situation in the 1950s. And, a lot of people from the old new left, like, Sharon Pratt or,
Karen Bass.
Karen Bass, I'm getting all things confused there. Karen Bass were part of the Venceremos Brigade, which was a constant churning of the people who consider themselves leftists going into Cuba to receive instruction on how to make a revolution. And that is all very, very true and extensive. But it's not the whole story of the New Left or, what the actual, makeup of the DSA actually is. The DSA is a combination of two organizations. An organization called what we used to call DSOC, the Democratic Socialists of America, and another offshoot of the New Left called the New America Group, which were basically the veterans of the Students for Democratic Society. So that is, really what the DSA is, and they are a certified member of something called the Socialist International, which encompasses the British Labour Party, the Fabian Society, which is the British Labour Party, most of the European governments. All right. So now you're starting to cook about what the actual threat is. Bill Ayers, for example, who was Barack Obama's good buddy, was part and parcel of DSA and the New America Foundation and the veterans of the SDS movement in the United States. That had to do with Cuba, but it had to do mostly with the British and the British Labour Party and how that actually came into the United States. Bernie Sanders has been part of this grouping ever since I think he was born. I think he was born with basically a DSOC baby bottle in his hand. And we, Susan and I, in our lifetimes, have had numerous encounters with this grouping. None of them actually, some of it involved fisticuffs. Our former organization was actually investigated by the FBI for denying civil rights to the Communist Party USA. And the whole, things which attacked us mostly came out of this formation, which is heavily intelligence community sponsored, oligarchical sponsorship. And I see in the chat, people keep referring to Richard Poe's book, which I think is really quite relevant at this point in time, how the British invented communism and blamed the Jews. That's really kind of a very pertinent story for today, isn't it? And I really suggest that people get that book, read it. You'll get yourself really oriented in terms of what's really going on here with this DSA menace. We're going to be working on a pamphlet to sort of put all this in perspective for people. You can probably expect that over the course of the next 30 days or so. But right now, I highly recommend Richard's book, which will give you a very good history of the whole thing. Starting with, the reason why he wrote the book is off of something which our friends did called Palmerston's Zoo, in which we actually dealt with how all of these movements, these artificial political movements, were invented going all the way back to Lord Palmerston as a way of making sure the United States Revolution did not come to Europe, and also used for attack purposes against the United States, including in the Civil War. So it's a very useful. Richard originally thought that we were crazy in what we said about Palmerston Zoo, but he actually researched it and figured out that we were right. And the result is a book which, in my view, is much better even than what we originally wrote. So I highly recommend that for people.
Yeah, and I'd also go back to the report that Secretary Rubio and the State Department left out on Cuba, because there's kind of a nugget in there which I think is extremely important, and it highlights the fact that communism, which is dangerous and a problem, is often not where the whole thing starts, because that report makes the point that when Fidel Castro first took over in Cuba, he did not consider himself a communist. He considered himself a revolutionary. And even Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, testified in a secret hearing. And again, this is in a footnote in that Rubio report, which I read. Even Allen Dulles says, we do not believe Fidel Castro to be a communist. Now, once he established ties with the Soviet Union in order to get money, he became a Marxist-Leninist communist. I think it was out of convenience. But then you have to ask yourself the question, all right, well, after the Soviet Union collapses between 89 and 1991, how does Cuba keep going? Because it is a crappy little island, without many resources and so on. So how did it keep going? Well, if you then start with the assumption that this is another operation run by the oligarchs, which then adopted for sake of convenience its communist Soviet connections, but it kept going after the Soviet Union fell. Well, then it shouldn't be all that surprising to see that Castro and Lula, I think it was in 1991, but I might be wrong on the date, but it was in the period when the Soviet Union fell. They established a new institution called the Sao Paulo Forum in Brazil, which brought together all sorts of revolutionary terrorist drug groups throughout Central and South America to basically repackage themselves in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, who invited the Sao Paulo Forum candidates? These are candidates basically picked out of Fidel Castro's networks. Who invites them to Washington, D.C. to meet with people in the Clinton administration? The Inter-American Development Bank, which is a major oligarchical organization which has on its board and had on its board of directors people like Robert McNamara, right? The Vietnam War body count guy, who then became the head of the World Bank and who was one of the biggest depopulation control advocates in the world, and Bernard Strong, same kind of person, like a smaller version of a Klaus Schwab or a George Soros up in Canada, who was also very big in terms of pushing the green agenda, depopulation, anti-human policies. They're the ones who keep the Sao Paulo Forum going and give legitimacy to their candidates. So again, if you want to shut these dangerous operations down, don't get stuck with the front, mask, which is communism in this case, because you're not going to be effective. And just again, describing the evils of communism to somebody who thinks, well, the alternative is George Soros and the World Economic Forum, communism sounds pleasanter than what I'm living through, you're going to lose. But what if instead you fight communism by making clear that it's simply another appendage of this British imperial system, of this international oligarchical elite, and that's what Donald Trump and his administration are dismantling? Well, you can actually take the radicalism of some of these younger people and say, yeah, you're right, we should bring down the system. It just doesn't happen to be the American system of capitalism. We have to bring down the imperial globalist system, which has spawned communism. So again, if you pay attention to some of the things that this administration is giving us, like this very fascinating history, which I was not aware of, in terms of Castro's origins. And then they don't answer the question. The State Department doesn't, we do. What happened after the Soviet Union falls? Well, then you can see there's actually a continuity. And the question of communism in the Soviets is just, in a certain sense, a pass-through ideology to be used as necessary for this older imperial ideology.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. Thank you to all of our viewers on YouTube and X.com. Plenty more questions. I'm going to try and squeeze in as many more as I can here. First, I want to say, Dane, thank you very much for your super chats today. I'm going to pull up the book for you one more time here. The book is called How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. You can get it on Amazon, either in paperback or Kindle. Again, How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. It's it sticks with you after you say it a few times. So yeah, you can just check it out on Amazon.com. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dane. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'd also like to give a quick shout out. John S., thank you. Please share the video link to differentiate the two types of financial systems. I understand it when I hear it, but don't have the talking points down in case I come across somebody open-minded. We don't have, could you, Baby Barbara, Susan, do you have any resources you could recommend for this?
Well, I keep thinking that we need to do that. Remember my 4th of July message, Adam? It
Yeah.
sort of attempted to do that, and I think we should put it on Promethean Action under the About section. Maybe create a kind of start here and find a couple others of our videos which are a little more basic, because sometimes we do that. That 4th of July video that I did, I sort of stepped back from the immediate news and tried to deal with it from a more conceptual standpoint. I think our friend Mike Steger has done one or two as well that kind of zoom out, and give you the whole landscape before you get into the immediate situation. So we will try and put on the Promethean Action website maybe a little section under the About Us where we say, start here or something. But we hear what you say, and you're absolutely not the first person to raise something like this.
Yeah, John, what I would recommend is get our free newsletter. The link is in the description. Let us stay in contact with you. Even if you just get the weekly, that's fine. And as we produce new content, you'll be able to see what we're doing. So we are working to produce more of these kinds of educational series like you're describing. Thank you for joining us. And Andalusian Moon, thank you for waiting so patiently. I had your other question queued up, but I want to take this one instead because I think we haven't really discussed this as much today. So thank you again for joining us. Is appointing Tony Blair to the Abraham Accords an account of keep your enemies close? I'm not sure I understand Trump's choice for him. Thank you, Andalusian Moon. Barbara, your thoughts on this one?
Well, I tend to think that's what it is. I mean, you have to understand Blair, after he left the British government, became the man in the entire Middle East. All of the efforts at peace negotiations between the Arabs and the Israelis were being handled by Tony Blair. So he, brings, in a certain sense, in addition to being, an absolute evil, satanic jerk, he brings a whole portfolio of contacts and other things to the process of actually trying to negotiate a peace here. He got very rich in the process. Everything that's on the Tony Blair Institute, if you go to it and you'll see it, is a globalist, bunch of crap. But the point is that I believe that because of particularly his relationships to the Gulf monarchies, he's a pretty significant player in the thing, although they're all highly suspicious of him because they think he's just an agent of Israel. And one could make that argument in terms of how he's actually done things in the area. But that's the reason. I don't think you can ignore him if you're trying to bring peace to the area, given the whole, the Middle East is basically the entire place. If you look at it, from the perspective of outer space, you put a British flag over the entire area because of the British history there ever since the Sykes-Picot Agreement after World War I, and even prior to that. So you can't, you gotta know what Blair is doing. And, if you're going to actually be successful, you got to know what the guy is doing, and you've got to have him under constant surveillance because he is the guy for the British Empire in the Middle East. I tend to think about it. I'm not sure that's how Trump is thinking about it, but that'd be my take on it.
Thank you, Barbara. And we're going to take this question here. It's probably going to be our final question. And thank you, Andalusian Moon, for joining us today. Take down the comment. Here we go. Okay. And this one here is on Tony Fauci. Okay. And says, why do all the questions of Dr. Fauci only entail whether or not he supported gain of function? I think the very fact that he supported this virus, which was deadly, and released it to the whole world is enough for a charge of premeditated murder. Even if only one person died, he's guilty. Is it possible to pardon premeditated murder Also, has anyone determined whether an auto-penned pardon has any teeth? Thank you, Anne, for your question and your comments. Barbara and Susan.
Well, the answer to whether you can pardon premeditated murder is yes. The pardon power of the president is absolute in terms of the Constitution. The auto-pin pardon is about to be tested. I believe the Senate this morning is in the process of actually voting him in contempt. I'm not sure how that's turning out. I saw the committee hearing a little bit with Rand Paul, etc. And, you know, Florida is probably going to indict the guy, under for state charges, which of course the pardon doesn't actually cover. So that's the answer to your question. I do believe he's going to end up being prosecuted. Apparently, Rand Paul now has his phone from that period, in addition to having his diary. So I think we're going to hear a whole lot more of that in the next week or so.
Final questions and thoughts for our audience today.
Well, I'm going to sort of pick up on that from a standpoint of, I think, how people in general have to think about this fight. Martin Luther King famously said, the arc of the universe bends long. In other words, it takes a long time, but it bends towards justice. I think the less that we focus on the immediate legal ramifications against some of these people, which are difficult to prove or to get a conviction, although, as Barbara just said, certain traps have now been set up, I think, for Mr. Fauci. I think the larger question is, what is the justice that we're looking for? Yes, ultimately, these people should face justice here on Earth, but honestly, they're all ultimately going to face the ultimate justice, which is probably going to be a lot more unrelenting than anything that we could even do to them. The real justice is to free the nation and to free the world from the evils of oligarchism, which is how you get an Anthony Fauci, which is how you get a Robert McNamara or a George Soros or any of these people that we're talking about. We need to free the world from them. And the American system and the philosophy and the structures that our founding fathers gave us, which too few Americans understand how to use, are the ways to free us and ensure that everybody has the opportunity of operating in a system which is not rigged by these satanic evil globalists, but has the opportunity to operate within a system which cherishes the creative contribution that every human being can make. That's the war that we just have to remember. That's what we're fighting. Not the immediate gratification of seeing somebody who is evil behind bars. Should they be? Yes. Can we do it at this particular moment in time? Well, each case is going to be individual, and I would submit until we get better judges and prosecutors, probably not most of the time. So where do you put your passion? You put your passion into this larger fight, and that's going to take care of these other questions down the road.
The Constitution of the United States gives you all out there the power, more power than anybody else, and we haven't used it effectively, except in 2024 in the recent period. Now's the time. We've got to use it once again, and if we do so, you're going to clear the turbulence in some respects out of the way, which we're going through now because it's something which is called combined and even development in political science. And it's a turbulent period, which people tend to want to go to safety. All right. But here's the deal. That's what all creativity is like. It's very turbulent. When you're inventing something new, the people who are wedded to the old get pretty ticked off because you're challenging their identity. I'm this big bureaucrat. I'm Mr. Science, says Anthony Fauci. All right. No, you're not. You're a fool. But, you know, if you take him down, all the people who actually believed in him and staked their identity and their arguments with their friends and everything else on believing in him don't necessarily say, hey, I confess I was totally wrong. I screwed up. I didn't think right, etc. They're not going to say that. They're mostly going to get ticked initially. That's how kind of this identity question works in politics. So what people have to do is just take into your heart that we're at a moment like the day before the revolution in the United States, in which our founding fathers had to pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, going up against an apparatus which is just killing us and killing people all over the world. And we're in a big battle now. We have, like, you know, a couple months in which we've got to basically win this phase of the battle for the future. So that's how I'd end it. Don't get hung up on all of the fluff which the enemy is throwing out there to get you distracted. Figure out how you're going to get 10 to 15 people to the polls to vote Republican to keep the president's agenda going, no matter if you have to hold your nose for the senator or representative that you're actually voting for. It matters. You are who's really in charge. And it's about damn time we actually took that responsibility for real in all of us. So that's how I would make my final comments on the show.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The vertical live stream was definitely a hit. We're going to be doing it, hopefully, from here on out. And we'll see everyone next Thursday. Make sure you subscribe to our free email newsletter and stay subscribed to our channel here. Thank you very much.